Professor Njoroge was the man in the news yesterday. He went to Parliament. He basically told Parliament what MPs ought to have known if they had taken time to basically look at everything that Njoroge has been presenting to them since he was appointed. He took a budget policy statement. He has taken the budget estimates. He has proposed the finance bill. All those things are what he was basically highlighting yesterday and saying, this is the thinking of this administration in spending and raising of revenue in the next financial year. That's what we want to discuss. Is this first Kenya Kwanza government budget a hustler budget? We're joined by Professor X.N Iraki from the University of Nairobi and an economist, and he's here. He's in the studio. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning. How are you?
It's been a while.
Did you listen to the 3 hours lecture by Professor Njoroge?
You know, when a lecturer now starts going for 3 hours.
No, why don't
3 hours, 26 minutes.
I did not.
You did not?
Nope.
She did?
3 hours,
Did
26
you?
minutes.
Yes.
Did you listen to the entire 3 hours and 6 minutes?
I read the budget. I did not listen to it.
I didn't listen to him either.
Not because I'm a bad guy, but I was busy somewhere else.
You were teaching.
No,
You were delivering a lecture of your own.
I didn't want to say that. I didn't see him as a competitor. But here we are.
Here we are. We'll be discussing that. To welcome you to the show, Prof, CT has the day's proverb. Today's proverb is...
Well, this is a final proverb from the country of Zambia. The whole of this week, our proverbs have been from the country of Zambia. And this is our last proverb from that country. Mother, carry me. I will carry you too.
Mother, carry me. I will carry you too.
That sounds like social security.
It
Well,
does.
welfare state.
Well, not welfare state.
No, it does.
I see it as social security.
Yes.
My mother will take care of me when I'm young.
Yes.
And when she grows older, I should take care of her.
Yes.
But they have not told us why it was mother, not father.
Well, they haven't
Fathers
actually.
don't carry us.
They do.
Economically.
They do. They do. But the person who is seen as the caregiver, primary caregiver, tends to be the mother.
And fathers have a habit of running away.
Fathers have a habit of being absent.
Not running away.
You can get granular and say running away because now you're not giving details of the absence.
And you can see he's very quiet. Eh?
Fathers don't run away.
Can you defend the fathers?
No. Absence doesn't mean they're not there. That's the notion that is presented. But in the process of caregiving, they do not feature in the day-to-day upbringing of children in most cases.
That one I agree with you.
Yes.
Do you have an equivalent proverb from Kenya?
I haven't given it thought, no. But if I do, I'm sure I'll come across
I'll
one.
wait for it next week.
The proverbs from Kenya. Equivalent proverb from Kenya.
Well, the challenge is on, so let me just say now, our proverbs for next week will be from Kenya. Yes.
And you look for one that
I
has
will look
mother
for one.
and carrying.
Yes.
Sawa.
Father carrying somebody.
Yes.
Or dropping someone.
Or dropping.
Yes.
So, Prof, you read the budget
Yes.
speech
Yes.
by the CS yesterday. And just like I said earlier, I mean, what the CS was saying is what he has been presenting to Parliament all this time. It was basically just summarizing the thinking of the government
And making it official.
and making it official. So what happens now after yesterday?
Maybe before I tell you what happens after yesterday, I want to make a few observations about what I read and what I read. One, the budget was 29 pages. You can take about 1.5 hours to read if you are fast reader. Throughout the speech, there was something like Mr. Speaker, sir. And I was wondering why it was not Mr. Speakers, because I thought there are 2 speakers nowadays. But there's only one Mr. Speaker. It's the first budget that this government has set itself free from President Uhuru Kenyatta's budget. Now they are free to do what they want, and we are waiting to see that. And there was something for everybody, the entrepreneurs, the employees, and even the hustlers. For the employees, I like the way they got some protection, for example, duties on imports. For the employees, good luck on taxes. And for the hustlers, there was the hustlers fund, which I think was enhanced. But what surprised me was there's still a budget deficit, but it is lower than last year's. And then there was a lot of emphasis on the achievement of the last 9 months, which I think was good. It came much earlier. And finally, I saw the role of IMF being highlighted, which was quite surprising. The CS highlighted what IMF has helped, how IMF has helped us, and World Bank. But finally, there wasn't a lot of excitement over the budget as we are used to. You couldn't even know there was budget reading yesterday. In the past, when you were young, it was a big thing.
It was.
Now, I don't know whether we have become used to it, whether Kenyans have other things to think about. But I think after the budget has been read, I think it is going to be discussed in Parliament, and then wait for the implementation. And some controversies because of the finance bill.
Because of that, of course. I guess we were even saying it yesterday. In those previous years under the previous administration, previous constitution as well, and even then before multipartyism at some point when there were price controls, the budget speech was significant because among the things that the Minister for Finance was doing was announcing the price of goods. That goods go up, price of goods go up, goods go down, and it would even come into effect from midnight on that same day.
And things would disappear the previous 1 week.
Yes. Things would disappear from the shelves, like you're saying. Some people would take the risk of actually hoarding things and then price goes down. And you're left with that kind of
losses.
stock. Proper losses. Nowadays, with this new constitution, when Parliament is now the budget-making institution, it's a longer process. So even as the CS is coming to make that speech in Parliament, it's basically just making the policy pronouncement on the direction that the administration is hoping to take in the next 12 months. You've said there are winners and there are losers. There are gainers and losers. You've talked about, for example, the enhanced Hustler Fund. Does the CS talk about the impact that we have had so far with the Hustler Fund and what we expect to see in the accelerated Hustler Fund going forward and such kind of things?
I think he shared some statistics on the number of people who have borrowed money, and the very interesting statistics, the number of repeat borrowers. I think there was even a record guy who has borrowed 50 times. I don't know where they got that data from. But the real impact on the people on the streets was not highlighted. So we know the money that was borrowed, we know who borrowed, how many times they borrowed. And they also talked about now people borrowing in groups. So instead of borrowing an individual, you can borrow in a group.
Yeah.
But the real impact of Hustler Fund was not highlighted. And it's not surprising because it takes time before such policy shifts results are seen. So maybe the next 1 or 2 years, we are going to see Kenyans on the street saying this business was funded by Hustler's Fund. We've started this group. It has now become a big corporation. But for now, it's too early to judge the success of Hustler's Fund.
If we look at some of the things that we're talking about, or rather that we have been shown this morning, were the big losers or the big winners. If we're looking at the big losers, because, let's save the best for last, what would be your thoughts? Because if we're just looking at some of these numbers now, for example, sports betting, 12% betting tax, and then the timing that is put on these payments and when they must be made. What parallel or what is the significance of this timing for some of these monies that we're being asked to pay? For example, media must pay within 12 hours a 15% excise duty on advertising. Sports betting tax must be paid within 24 hours of winnings. What would be the timing and the significance of it attached to these?
If you remember when we were discussing the finance bill, that was one of the most contentious issues. That if I collect tax as an agent, I must remit to the government in 24 hours. And the Kenyans have been asking why the urgency. In my opinion, the reason why the government want this money because it probably doesn't have enough money. It wants money as soon as possible. If we admit you to hospital on emergency basis, we should give you drugs as soon as possible. So I think the emergency of getting this money shows how much the government needs money. If you look at the budget deficit, it clearly indicates the government doesn't have enough money. There was a time the government was delaying in paying salaries. But I think the other reason why they want money as soon as possible is because the sooner you keep the money, the other chance that money might go elsewhere. So it's probably seen more as a question of being efficient. But 24 hours, 5 days, they should stick to 20. Because if I'm a businessman and I'm given money for 20 days, I can do so much with it.
Indeed. Would this, but I mean, the assumption most times is that when a government is looking at the year, the calendar year, and saying we must fund the operations of and the duties that we have as government, that is why the budget comes out, right? When you look at these numbers and then the finance bill, which essentially fuels your budget, you now say we are going to allow money to be gotten from 1, 2, 3, and that is what essentially will give life to this budget, right? Happens every year.
That's true.
Now, does it guarantee efficiency of use from an economic point of view? Does it guarantee that because we've said money will come from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and money will be reduced here, pulled here, does it guarantee that in that space, government will do everything that it's, number one, said it's going to do, and number two, everything it is supposed to do?
I think I compare a budget proposal and a marriage proposal. So when you marry, you have that lofty idea of what the marriage is all about, where you go for the honeymoon, and you'll be happy ever after. So when the government comes with a budget proposal, it tells us what it intends to do, where they will get the money from, and what they do with that money. It's never that way. And that's why you always see supplementary budgets, because the external circumstances keep on changing. The internal circumstances keep on changing. So as far as I'm concerned, the budget is an intention, but does not go as expected.
But then, Prof, that's where also it comes in. With that intention, shouldn't we be realistic with the intentions?
Remember that the proponents...
Just like when you're going into marriage, Sawa, you know clearly this is the level of income that you have, this is the kind of person that you have, this is the kind of opportunities that are available to you. You cannot be proposing and saying, I'm going to get into marriage and immediately move into this kind of lifestyle.
I think you have not been a politician. You must remember that behind the budget making, behind the budget policy statements is a lot of politics. That's why the budget is made by your representatives.
Are you equating politics to lies?
People who have politics, people who have interests, take care of. So when you come up with a budget, there are a lot of constituencies and stakeholders you must take care of. And that is why most of the time the budget is very ambitious, because there are so many stakeholders you must you must take care of. I totally agree with you that a good budget should be realistic, but it also must raise our expectations. So it's not surprising that we always have a budget deficit. We always spend more than we correct.
That's true. You see, the challenge here, for example, is on the projections. Revenue projections, which is where we get the gap for the deficit. And you can see clearly these revenue projections are unrealistic. The impact of that is that we end up borrowing more.
That's true.
Which ends up being a burden not just for this generation, but for future generations. That, in my books, is just being completely and utterly irresponsible.
I don't think it is irresponsible if you are if you are a politician. Because look at one of the reasons why we have a big budget deficit is because of the wages and salaries that we pay to the government employees. That's a very big cost.
Yeah.
So if we are to live within our means, it would mean reducing the number of government employees. Now, if you are the president of this country, or if you are governor, and you start telling people to go home, you can know the consequence of that. So the government knows, and the policy makers know that their projections are so rosy and so lofty. But because of that political reality, they have to keep on making those promises. But personally, I wish we had a balanced budget, that we don't need to keep borrowing, to keep worrying about where we are going to pay the extra money. But the political reality is that you have to take care of those so many interests.
Can we have a balanced budget? Is it possible
in some
for
countries
Kenya to have it whereby, you know what, we can live within our means, struggle a little bit here and there, not work with bloated government institutions, not work with bloated government spending at the expense of here we are saying that political appetites must be satisfied at the expense of the livelihoods of Kenyan citizens and the economy itself.
I wish we would change the constitution and make it clear that the budget should always be balanced. In some countries, they have a balanced budget. By law, that you must have a balanced budget. But in this country, it's not there. So the politicians, the leaders, have a lot of leeway in coming up with a budget that is not balanced. But you also have to remember that if we had a completely balanced budget, it would also restrict us. See, some of these deficits we get are sometimes for our own good. You borrow money to build highways, to build roads, and to fund development projects. Even projects like the U.S. interstate system was built by borrowing. So sometimes borrowing gives us a chance to get consumption we would get in future today, as long as we do that responsibly.
So, key word here, responsibly.
Yes.
And is that not the bane of our existence? Because we talk about the amounts of money owed, the amount of money borrowed, the amount of money in our budget, and there's always a discussion as to whether all that money, at the end of the day, is actually spent on what it was intended for.
And the reason why money is never spent in the way it is intended is because of you and me, all of us, because we are voters. As soon as we elect our MPs and senators to the parliament, we stop at that. We don't watch over them. But if we remained vigilant and demanded that we voted you to do ABC, to balance the budget, to make sure that money goes to the right use, that money would go to the right use.
Who watches the watcher?
Yes, as voters, we are supposed to watch our parliamentarians, our MPs, our counter reps. We are supposed to watch over them.
We should oversee the overseers.
Yes, but because we don't watch them, they do what they want. And I like the debate that came the other day. I don't know whether you remember, where the MPs were being told, you have to vote this way. Then they were saying, wait a minute. I like, was she one of the women left from Kiambu, or who was that?
She's the MP for Gedongori.
I will vote the way I want, as long as I represent my MPs.
My people.
My voters.
That was very bold, because she's realizing that she owes her allegiance to the people who voted her.
Yes.
But a lot of other real reps don't owe their allegiance to the voters. That's why they do what they want.
It's about you've said the reality of our politics.
Yes.
Also comes into play in the budget making.
No question about that.
But then the reality of our politics is also the reason why the Constitution created certain institutions. So they create that sort of a balance and check that says, all right, there's politics and then there's reality.
That's true.
The reality comes in the institutions. Public Service Commission, established under the Constitution, and this is the one that is supposed to look at the staff complement in government and come up with staffing policies. It says, if you go into any ministry, department, or agency, the complement in staffing should be at least 70% should be technical, and then 30% should be supporting. Now, there's a complaint that actually now this has just become jumbled. It's the other way around. You have 30% technical, 70% are supporting staff. You have 7 drivers. You have I don't know how many people. And this is a big issue. I will read an excerpt of what the CS read in Parliament yesterday, and I will, of course, start with the way what you said. He had every statement started with Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, he said.
I'd like to be a speaker for 1 month.
A large number of state corporations rely on the exchequer funding to service their payroll and other expenses. Over the years, bloated payrolls have remained a large burden to the exchequer, resulting in accumulated unserviced statutory obligations and pension liabilities running into billions of shillings. It's also been established that in most state corporations, a huge proportion of the staff complement comprises of support staff with a thin complement of technical staff, gravely affecting core service delivery. To address this, the State Corporations Advisory Committee will immediately embark on an aggressive program to rationalize staff, to keep them lean and strictly adhere to the 70-30 ratio of technical to support staff. In addition, the National Treasury shall henceforth only approve budgets for hiring staff for only state corporations that have received approvals from the State Corporation Advisory Committee, the Public Service Commission, and the Salary and Remuneration Commission. Is a CS saying we are now going to fire people?
That is very good on paper. But I would like to see that being implemented. If you remember that years ago, Also, President Moi tried to rationalize the civil service. And a lot of people were given good and handshake. And you can remember the consequences. I remember the price of eggs in Nairobi went down because everybody was keeping eggs. So I think there's a very good idea on paper from an economic point of view. But when you bring politics here, things are going to become very interesting because these people, the 70% you are saying are non-technical. How did they get there? Now, if you start telling them to go home, you hear certain people saying that our people are being finished.
Yeah.
Our people are being targeted. And that's where politics comes in. So I think at the end of the day, he talked about it, who watches over the watchers. But you see, if the voters comes and say, wait a minute, that's what the government is, that's what we want. We want the right people to be employed. We don't care whether it is my brother, we don't care whether it is my neighbor, whether it is my son. As long as we are getting the right skills, we are okay. But have we reached that level in this country where people can say, as long as we don't care what is popular, we care about what is right?
That's right.
I don't think we have reached that stage.
So it's all about us because now, like you said, if they go ahead and start rationalizing stuff in the parastatals and say we are firing all this excess number of people, the heat will come from all of us.
And remember that we have a very high level of unemployment in this country.
This hustler government is firing hustlers.
Yes. You hear that?
Okay. Shida ni yetu nimeona.
So we must never separate politics from economics.
From our reality.
Yes, and the reality for that matter.
But let's take a break. It's 8:30. Professor X.N Iraki from the University of Nairobi. He's an economist. He's here. He has read the entire speech by Professor Njoroge Ndongo. He was not listening to that speech because he was also delivering his own speech elsewhere. But he's here this morning because we're talking about this first hustler budget. Is it really a hustler budget? And what do we need to see to actually see budgets that work for this country?
Spice.
The conversation continues. We are looking at the 2023-2024 budget. The speech was delivered yesterday in Parliament by the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, Professor Njoroge Ndongo. And in the studio this morning, we have Professor X.N Iraki, who is an economist and a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. Looking at that speech, like we just were saying as we're getting into the break, that there are many things to balance. There's the political reality, there's the economic reality, and then there's a reality. And all those things have got to be balanced.
The expectation of the hustlers.
Which is now that reality. It's the expectation of the hustlers and what they expect from their government. However, ideally, what should carry more weight in trying to balance those three realities? Which one should have a higher percentage?
That's a very hard question. But before I answer that question, there's something a very good proposal I saw in this budget policy, which I think should mention by Cabinet Secretary. He said that any tax refund should be done within 6 months. So if I collect tax and I must remit it within 24 hours, why should I wait for 6 months to get my tax refund? Because I think the government needs money as much as us. So I think this should be reduced. When I lived in another country and I filed my taxes, if there was any tax refund, I took a check home. And you have to remember that when money is put into our hands, it's used more efficient than when it is in public hands. So I think that period should be reduced from maybe 6 months to 1 month.
Especially when they ask for it in 12 hours.
Yes.
Or 24 hours.
And then in your traffic update, you said the traffic is very good. People have no money. People are leaving their cars at home. That's why, and you have to remember it's the middle of the month. So maybe one of the budget proposals should be that we should be paid twice a month so that we don't go for salary advances. So balancing, back to your question. So you said there is the economic reality and there is political reality, and we need to balance that. It depends on who you ask, because as an economist, I always say that the economic reality should come. My thinking in the last 20 or 30 years, I'm not that old, is that if you put economics right, politics become right. And I've always given an example of South Korea. They went through a period of political upheavals. Turmoil. You remember people jumping from the houses, burning themselves. But when they got the economics right, you can see their politics has become right. Now, in Kenya, the argument has been that we put politics right, and then economics will come. I think we should look at a pair of scissors. For you to cut something with a pair of scissors, you need two blades. So I think we should look at the economic part of it and the political part of it, and then use that to cut through our problems. Because you are not going to solve economic problems without solving political problems. So we need politicians to think like economists, and we need economists to think like politicians.
Isn't it difficult though?
It's very
because
difficult.
The interest is not, and that's the thing, that in as much as we like to say, and it sounds fantastic that people represent for the people, it sounds great, but that it is not the overarching principle of why they're getting into that position.
That is why I'm saying the only way to make them think like that is to tell the voters, this is your government. So you cannot just sit after voting and say, let things sort themselves out. You must always watch.
Yeah.
If your politicians are not thinking about economics, for them to think about economics. If the economists are not thinking about politics, for them to do that. So we need more public participation. And it always surprises me because when you look at the Constitution, public participation is enshrined there. But we don't participate. We just watch from a distance. And that's why our leaders, our MPs do what they want, because they know as voters we do nothing. So I think these realities are with us, and they can be balanced. So I said economic reality and political reality. So the only way to counterbalance them is to bring that reality you are talking about. Let the voters be in between, watching the economic part of it and the political part of it. And they do that in other countries. I remember one time stopping on a street in the US Deep South. And I felt something I've never forgotten. There was a meeting. And guess what the meeting was about? It was a public meeting to name a street.
Yep.
A street. And that shows how voters are serious. Even
They're
naming
engaged.
a street, they have to participate. Our voters should not stop after voting. Should be vigilant throughout.
Should be very engaged.
Yes.
Let's come to the reality of things, though. Like I said, we have institutions in place. Okay. Yes, we have voted and we have created parliament, and we delegate our authority to our elected leaders to go and represent us. Okay, on such a concept, this heavy matter of taxation. Then we have all these other institutions in place. When a budget is being discussed in Parliament, it has a deficit of X amount. And by the time you're closing the year, the deficit is X times 2. That is a serious issue. Should there be no questions being asked on that? For example, we are closing this financial year with a deficit that's gone over $1 trillion shillings. We are coming into a new financial year with a revenue projection of 2.5 trillion shillings, when the reality is that we are not collecting 2 trillion shillings this year.
You know, anytime you go to...
As we talk about economics and economics thinking right, the people who are taking this to Parliament are economists.
If you go to any meeting, you always go through the minutes of the previous meeting.
Yes.
So one of the things I would want to see in future is the cabinet secretary, before he reads the budget, should spare maybe 3 pages telling us about how the previous year's budget performed, so that we know there was an increase in deficit. Who was responsible and what did you do about it? There were 3 or 4 supplementary budgets. Why were they there? And should we avoid that in future? You should even go beyond the budget deficit. There was something even else more serious that he raised, the cabinet secretary raised: absorption of funds. And as an economist, it leaves my head spinning. How can you not be able to use money? You're talking about budget
you're the one who
deficit.
requested for it.
Yes. On this side, you are saying, I want more money, but you cannot use it. So it clearly tells us that beyond economics and politics, we need to think more about how we do our things. We need to become more efficient. We have been talking about, he talked about e-procurement. We have been talking about IFMIS. He talked about public investment management system. So maybe one way to make things more efficient would be to use more technology, more information technology, so that we know where the money is coming from, where it is, and so on. Like nowadays, if I send a parcel by DHL or by UPS, I can track where it is.
You can track where it is at
So,
any time.
At any time. So we need the budget to be like that. So as a voter, where I am, whether I'm in Karachunyo, whether I'm in Shamahoho, whether I'm in Kanyonyo or Embu, I should be able to go online and say, oh, this is where the project is. This is the bottleneck. These projects have been delayed. Because if we become more observant, if we become more involved in the running of this country, things should be streamlined. But for now, I will keep on saying, most of us are not bothered.
But you know, in that statement, we are not bothered. I think you get to the heart of the matter, because it isn't that we are not able to, but we have taken a back seat when it comes to issues that concern us. Now, if this isn't cured, then it doesn't matter how long we have discussions around the economy or politics, the status quo will remain. So the question is, how do we get people to understand that they are responsible for the situation they find themselves in and that they can actually change it?
I'll give you a good example. You looked at this budget. You said you did not read through it.
Didn't listen.
There was a very curious item that has, I think, 245 million Kenyan shillings. Some fund for gender-based violence. But if you remember the last 2-3 months, there has been a lot of talk about gender-based violence.
Yes.
And you can clearly see that by people being active, some of the reasons. So all is not lost. If we got more involved, there'll be more changes. And the readers, the policy makers will start making appropriate changes that are in tune with our aspirations.
You know, Prof, there's something interesting that happened the other day. Someone sent me, these clips that people keep sending. It had to do with the Swedish Parliament and how it is they manage their affairs, the administrative management, the papers people get, the salaries,
housing
allowance, the number of vehicles that are available for public use and all that. Now, my friend Eric here commented on it, but there are others who commented on it and were more vociferous. And the sum total of the comments were, how can somebody be a member of parliament and they are suffering like this? Now,
for the benefit of everybody who has not seen the clip, give highlights of what the clip is saying about members of the Swedish Parliament.
Well, for instance, you're given a one-room apartment. Those who are in the business of selling houses will tell you it's a studio, okay? And you're offered...
An MP is housed in a studio.
In a studio. And if your family visits, you pay for them because the accommodation is meant for you, not for your family, okay? Transport is public transport. And you are given a ticket for a year, meaning you can use that public transport.
On trains and buses.
In short, okay?
Yes.
So the question that I hear people raising, but we hear that some of these MPs cycle to work. They do. Because a bicycle is a mode of transportation. It gets you to where you are. In short, one gets the impression that being a member of parliament seems like a voluntary job where you're paid a small stipend to just cover your basic costs. That's it.
It's missionary work.
That's it. So the question is, from a Kenyan perspective, why would one want to be a member of parliament in this place? Now, that to me got to the heart of the matter. Because and these are people who are wananchi. And these are people, some of whom I've heard complaining very loudly about our MPs and so forth. So I was thinking, but if you feel that an MP cannot more or less be a public servant who volunteers, by the way, a certain number of newspapers are given and they're supposed to be shared with the members of parliament. Meaning, there is very frugal living. Yes. That parliament lives by example. Their expenditure is at the bare minimum. Ours is the complete opposite. It's like they cannot spend enough. They must look for ways and means of either earning or spending. Now, it brought to my mind just the comments I got from the people I shared this with, that we have embraced this conspicuous consumption we complain about, and we have considered it to be the norm. And we don't seem to be able to connect that conspicuous consumption, the adoration and worship of it, and the problems we keep having.
Thorsten Vebren was a Norwegian immigrant who went to US, I think, in 18 something. I think he was born 1859, died in 1901. And he came up with the concept of conspicuous consumption. He was a donor at University of Wisconsin, and he is famous for giving all students one grade. I don't know why he used to do that. You all get either A's or B's or so on. So I think there are two problems here in this country.
Yes.
One is our definition of power. We have a very low way of defining power. The car you drive, the house you stay, and the people you associate with. But in other countries, people have alternative definitions of power. So I can be an MP, I can be a reader, I can drive a Vitz and still be very powerful.
Yes.
Mahatma Gandhi was very powerful, and he never used to put on suits.
No.
But he was very powerful. We talk about him today. So until the time we started redefining power, our MPs will always be admired for the car they drive. The other day I went to my village driving somebody's big car. I have just borrowed a car because the place is very muddy. And but in 24 hours, 5 guys had come to our home. And guess what they were coming to do? They were, nipatie cars, give me some work to campaign for you. Because I had a big car.
Your next thing is that you will be
Yes. So unless we define what is power and what the status symbols, then we are going to see a lot of people complaining that an MP is, how can an MP suffer like that? You remember the one who said, talked about the wheelbarrow one time? So the next thing we need to think about is, why can't our leaders work for you entirely? If today you made me a cabinet secretary or an MP and told me I'm going to pay you nothing, I'll be very happy because that honor is enough. And a very good example I've given from Kenyan history. Some of the best performing schools in Kenya were missionary schools. They were being run by teachers who were not paid. And they performed well. Even up today, some of them, we still hear the echoes of those schools. Now, when you started paying teachers, the school has not performed equally. So we have a very good example of how voluntarism can work. And that is why MPs don't work, because we pamper them too much. The other day I saw some MPs going to the coasts. They have to carry, I don't know, a nanny, a hairdresser, and so on. And I pay taxes, but I drive a Vitz.
Yes.
So why should the person I sponsor be driving a big car?
Why should the person who works for you?
Yes. I like the way you put it. The person who works for me is like you're driving a bigger car than me.
You chosen to drive the small car.
No, but why can't
you can't afford?
Why can't we also do that? Why can't we have our MPs living a frugal life?
Choosing to live frugal.
Yes, why not?
That's your choice.
So I think what you're trying to tell us, or what you are saying indirectly, is that we need to restructure our value system.
That's it.
And it is possible, but the only way to do that is we start with the young ones. And I hope that is a big component of CBC. I've not looked at the content, but I think that should be a big part of CBC so that we see life differently.
You know, the question that you raised about our education system, I speak now as an educator.
We are together in that.
Yes. The underlying notion and ethos behind it was that it was a calling. You didn't teach because you're going to be paid. It is something you wanted to do. Yes. And because it is something you wanted to do, it did not really matter how much you're paid or what happened where. You would do it anyway. So, and it explains why teachers took pride in how well their students did. That was the defining moment for you.
So our MP should take pride in how the country is performing.
Yes.
Or should be very truthful from the very beginning whether
Yes.
their interest really does lie in representation, oversight, and legislation. Because, I mean, is your interest really there? If we get to the point whereby we're restructuring a moral system that we've talked about, then I dare say that 75% of the folks who get into these positions would not, if we're being very honest about propelling this particular situation, whereby you get to the point where you can have an officer, public or otherwise, living a frugal life, and it would not be news. Do you think it is news when you go into these countries whereby members of parliament live a frugal life or ride a bicycle to work? It's not a big deal because it's normal.
We also
it wouldn't be news.
We also need to go beyond that. I one time visited the two parliaments, the Parliament of Ontario and the Parliament of British Columbia in Canada. Now, one thing I noted is that both parliaments are not fenced. You can walk around.
It's not fenced.
Yeah, they are not fenced. There's no fence at all.
Okay.
So why do we fence our parliament?
They don't have barbed wire?
There is nothing.
No broken glass?
No.
Okay.
I even walked into one of them. Because if you are elected by the people, you should be open to the people. Don't hide from them. That's why I'm saying we need to a lot of restructuring in how we view life, how we view power, how we view the people who vote for us, the people we serve, and so on. This class system in this country is another problem. That I have to be in that class, somebody has to be in that class. So we need to break those classes. And I hope that is one of the agendas of the House of Government, because we want people to think as equals.
Open the doors of State House to the hustlers.
Yes.
Let them come and experience
and the doors of
sit here.
opportunities.
And the doors of opportunity to the hustlers, so that they can all see and feel that they have the opportunity. You gave the example of South Korea and said, look at the journey that they had to undergo. But it took leadership.
That's true.
It took, a certain crop of leaders, not many. Must have been 1, 2 to 5 who led by example. So maybe that's all we need now. The thing is, the people of South Korea did not identify that leader. They just elected that leader by chance, and the leader happened to be a good leader.
But I think there's one thing I need to add also, that we need to redefine, maybe to respond to your issue, we need to redefine what is capitalism. Capitalism was never about money. It was about you pursuing your interests as a society benefits. But if you're a very good broadcaster, people benefit from your broadcasting, and we pay you well for that. If I'm a very good engineer, I'll be paid very well for my engineering work, but the society also benefits. But now we seem to have defined capitalism as parasitism. But how much can you eat from the others by doing as little as possible? And that's why we're not progressing as fast as expected. And the budget should give incentives to the people who work hard, the people who go beyond the core of duty, not the people who are able to game the system.
Based on that, and from now, the numbers that we're looking at from yesterday, and even the projections, the calculations, the conversations that have been had over the last 3 or so months, if you were to give, a look into your economic crystal ball, what would the next 1 year look like? With the numbers and also obviously a bit of, common sense in terms of what we truly see to be the issues. What does it look like?
I wish that I was a prophet, so I would give a more realistic projection. But in the next 1 year, I don't expect things to be very rosy in the next 1 year. So because if you raise taxes, it damps the economic growth. But if these taxes that we are going to raise, if the money we are borrowing from IMF is put into the right use responsibly, then we are going to suffer in the next 1 year. Then after that, I would see things becoming lossy. I would see things turning around. So the key word here is, are we going to put the money we are raising from taxes, from debt, or cutting the waste into the right use? Because you can cut waste and put that money into more waste. So my thinking is I'm very optimistic that if this budget is implemented as was proposed, then I see things becoming rosy after next year. But the next 1 year, we have to suffer a bit.
It's going to be a tough one.
It will be a tough one, no question about it. And even the cabinet secretary talked about a perfect storm.
Yeah.
I'm just quoting him.
Yes, we talked about that perfect storm earlier on in the day. The thing that I see as beneficial with everything that we're talking about is that we're talking about it. And that we are having more conversations about this finance bill than any other finance bill in this country has ever had.
Something happened in Kenya in the last 2-3 years, which nobody's celebrating. For the first time, economics became the key agenda in this country. If you remember when Raila Odinga was campaigning, when William Ruto was campaigning, the main issue was economics.
Yep.
And it's interesting, 1 year later, we are still talking about economics. In fact, 2-3 years ago, nobody even knew what the finance bill was. I'm sure it was never in this studio.
Actually, most people think the finance bill only came this year.
Yes.
It's Ruto's thing.
Yes, Ruto's thing.
Yes.
And somebody tell them, actually, we've had finance bill for as long as we've existed.
That is true.
And they say, you mean? You say, yes, it is true.
So everybody now is Homo economicus. I'm sure Kenyans are conversant with Homo habilis or Homo sapiens. So everybody now is Homo economicus. And that is good for the country.
We argue in this studio that any such discussion, no matter how vigorous, no matter how contentious, is good because we get to understand more about many things we did not understand before.
That's true.
Yes.
And the interconnectedness.
Yes.
But I think Kenyans are known as some of the most resilient people in the world. So despite all the problems we are talking about, I'm sure we are going to solve these problems. We went through World War II. We went through COVID.
Colonialism.
We went through all the big droughts we have had. And we are here. So I think despite all the problems we are talking about, Kenyans must never lose focus of the fact that this is our country.
Sometimes that resilience works against us because our political leaders seem to know we are resilient. So it means they're constantly pushing the envelope.
I'm not sure about that, but we let them do that.
That's the thing. Because they know.
We are resilient.
Yes. Because
and we are focusing.
Yes, and we will look at a situation and we will not bother them because we're focusing on how do we work around this one here.
Let me give you an example. You see, Kenyans keep on complaining about politicians doing this and doing that. If you just get an MP and you say this MP is not doing the right thing, and he calls a political rally and nobody turns up, he calls another political rally, nobody turns up, I'm sure that guy will either be taken to hospital. Or he's not taken to hospital. He will start apologizing to the voters. And I think we have never realized how much power voters
the
in
power
this country
of
have.
the voter.
If we realize that, a lot of things in this country would go right.
Prof, always a pleasure having you here. Asante sana for joining us today. Professor X.N Iraki, economist and professor at the University of Nairobi. Keep it here for more conversations.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start